John Tavares nets a pair as the Maple Leafs come out of the All-Star break with a win in Columbus. Welcome into Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Nationwide Arena, or just outside of Nationwide Arena, as he's making his way back to Toronto. The Maple Leafs blanking the Blue Jackets 3-0. It is nice to hear your voice again, Dave. It's been a couple of weeks, feels like, since we last talked about the Maple Leafs playing any sort of hockey game, and they are victorious 3-0 over the Blue Jackets. And I think it's always interesting to see how things are going to play out in the first game back, especially on a long layoff like the Maple Leafs had, because we did, see some teams play right out of the gate on Monday when the NHL returned. So for the Leafs to be off since February the 1st was quite a long break. But what did you think of their first game back on the ice in almost 10 days?
Yeah, and it's great to hear your voice as well, Rob. I thought this went exactly the way it was probably going to go for them in terms of a recipe for a victory. Get a team that also had a break like the Blue Jackets did. Go in, play tight defensively. It was a road game in every sense of the word, Rob. Like, it was boring in there, and that's what visiting teams try and do, especially if there's any sort of, jump or explosion to try and get everyone going. And there just wasn't. It was just Toronto containing, playing tight defensively. And to Columbus's credit, Toronto wasn't really able to capitalize on a whole heck of a lot for much of the game until later in the second period when they finally broke out and created a bit of a cushion here. So in that regard, it went pretty well for the Maple Leafs. But at that point, it's just a matter of playing a good road game, letting your goaltender kind of pick up where things left off, and just making sure that you are solid and looking like the team you were heading into the break, minus the game against the Boston Bruins, of course.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, to get a team that's been on a long break is one thing, but to get a team that's as bad as the Columbus Blue Jackets is about as good of a recipe as you could ask for the Maple Leafs. Let's hear from head coach Sheldon Keefe, who gave his thoughts on his team's performance.
I just that we, first of all, got a kill on the penalty kill there early and scored on the power play, and then that gives us control of the game in terms of the score. We obviously didn't make good on the number of chances that we had to extend our lead, but within that, I thought we played a pretty solid and patient game. Sammy made some good saves for us at key times, but really didn't give up a lot, and then extended our lead in the third period, which is what you want to do. So all in all, for first game coming out of the break, it was a good night for our guys.
Yeah, not much to complain about if you're Sheldon Keefe. I know he wasn't very happy about the Zach Aston-Reese penalty that the Leafs took early on in the first period, as you mentioned there, to try to get right into the game on the PK is probably not the way you want to start things up. But, I thought, for some of the guys that had the long layoff, John Tavares, who did not go to the All-Star game, I thought looked pretty good for his first game back. It's a couple of goals, a nice pass from Mitch Marner on both of those goals, and we'll hear from Marner in a second. But I think this is a situation where you just look at the chemistry, and I think that's a big part, right? That these guys have played with each other for so long that, sure, it might take a few minutes to kind of get things going again, but once the Leafs really got their feet going and kind of got back to that game action, it was pretty clear that it was going to be their night, even though that Jonas Korpisalo did a lot to try to slow them down in this one, because he was pretty strong for Columbus. Felt a lot like that playoff series a few years ago where the Maple Leafs were not able to convert on their chances, and you thought, oh geez, it's a 1-0 game. Maybe Columbus is going to find their way back in this. But overall, I thought it was a pretty strong night for them.
Yeah, I saw one tweet that was floated out there. I can't remember who said this looks like the 2020 Korpisalo that we're getting, and it certainly was a goaltending battle for a lot of it. This is how Columbus stays into games at this point. They are a team that's got talent, but defensively there's things that kind of go all over the place, and they need their goaltender to really step up, and Korpisalo has. And everything I hear about is that if a team is out there at the trade deadline looking for a particular type of goalie in terms of depth, that Korpisalo is actually a pretty good candidate, expiring deal, and can really be a difference maker for a team that needs a capable seasoned goaltender. And so I think he showed that as well. On the flip side, there was a lot of talk about Gavrikov going into this game and perhaps where he might get moved. And I didn't think it was a particularly strong game for him. I thought he got exposed on a couple of things. And so one thing that that really stood out for me was Timothy Liljegren when he had that play, I believe it was in the second period, where he just cut through the defense, including Gavrikov. So for him to be able to do something like that, I don't think was a very good look for him. And so those are some of the kind of things that the Blue Jackets are going to have to correct. But to Toronto's credit, they managed to kind of counter with that and just play good defensive hockey. And as boring as it was to watch, it was a perfect road game for Toronto to kind of do that, minus the offense, which they finally exploded for later in the game.
Yeah, definitely not a boring game for John Tavares with a couple of goals, and says, yeah, it wasn't the cleanest game, but they got the job done.
No doubt you want to come out on the right foot. I think we talked about not coming out flat and letting the break be a lag in our game, but be fresh and excited to play and knowing needed a good effort. So, all in all, I expect both teams to be better tomorrow, but, we did some good things and, responded well. I think after the first, we probably didn't control the neutral zone as much as we'd like. So a lot of good things. Obviously, Sammy, a great job in net. And I think everyone throughout the lineup, strong contributions. I think the D were really solid, physical, helping breaking pucks out and strong in our net front.
And it's so interesting, Dave, that even though there weren't a ton of goals in this game, all three goals the Leafs scored were absolute highlight reel type of goals. I mean, Mitch Marner on that first goal where he has William Nylander on his left for the one-timer, but decides to go to John Tavares on the backhand sauce, and then Tavares is able to tip it over Jonas Korpisalo for the goal. Was really impressive. The tic-tac-toe passing play with David Kampf, Morgan Riley, and Pierre Engvall, and then Marner again with a little drop pass to Tavares for that third goal. Again, it's just a testament to how impressive these guys are, that even though they haven't played in 9-10 days, they can still come out and show these flashes of brilliance. But let's hear from Marner, who was asked about that decision to go to Tavares instead of Nylander on that first Toronto goal.
Yeah, I mean, coming down the slot there, and Peak made a nice play. Tried to extend out, and I thought I could maybe make a play to Willie, or I thought I had to make maybe, I guess a sauce pass as well. I don't know. I just thought I had a play, and it worked out.
And it just goes to show you, Dave, the impressive vision and ability that Mitch Marner has, that he can make that play. I saw some screenshots of, just before that goal was scored where Tavares, looks covered. And if you had told someone in that freeze frame that Tavares is going to be the one that scores that goal, I don't think anybody would have thought that. So just, a really impressive play by Marner, and obviously a great finish by Tavares as well.
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, that's just Marner just being fresh, being skilled, and just developing and evolving as he's done this season. Going into that All-Star game, even though he didn't really play that much, he was also kind of asked, is there a little bit of an advantage because your break was maybe the shortest and you had to do some things? And he was like, well, not really. I mean, you only really play one game in that spot, and then you're not really going full bore at that point. So even though he had 6 assists in those 2 games that he played, helping the Atlantic Division win in that All-Star game, he didn't really think much of it at that point. It was just a matter of, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I'm skilled. I can do these things. But going back into game action and settling in, he's able to just pick up right where he left off. And talking to a lot of different players today, including Justin Hall in the morning, they were just kind of saying that even though everyone was off in the break, and Justin Hall did spend some time with Muzzin and Marner out in the Bahamas, they were still working out. They were still doing some things. So even though they were able to kind of disconnect and do some of those things, they were still staying connected and focused and just keeping themselves sharp for when ultimately they were going to be needed. It's kind of the first real break that that the NHL players have had that was a proper break, not like the COVID break last year, not like, the quick 56 game sprint where there really was no break at all before that. And so it's been really interesting in that regard to see the Leafs perform as well as they did. And we talk a lot about the Leafs, not necessarily playing hard and well against some of the lesser opponents. But I think that the Blue Jackets also having a break really served Toronto well because the pace was very slow to start and the Leafs were able to kind of ramp up. And that's why it was a slow build to the explosion later in the game. Obviously, Marner, a big part of that as well.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know if the Columbus Blue Jackets win this game no matter the situation. They're pretty terrible. It's probably, I know the Anaheim Ducks beat the Maple Leafs earlier this year. We all remember that game, of course, the final game of the West Coast trip for the Leafs early on in the season. And, they're pretty terrible. The Blackhawks are pretty terrible, but the Blue Jackets might be the worst team I think I've seen all season long. They are truly horrific and pretty surprising when you've got some guys like Johnny Gaudreau. Boone Jenner's a solid player. Patrick Laine is a guy that can score. But outside of that, nobody on that team can score a goal. I actually couldn't believe it watching the TV broadcast and hearing Cord Miller and Mike Johnson talk about Liam Foudy, who I think people remember scored the back-breaking goal in Game 5 on that terrible goal on Freddie Anderson.
He was really good in that series.
He was. I mean, he's blazing fast. He's got a ton of speed. Great junior career. Had some nice moments with the World Juniors. That's his only NHL goal since he's come to the NHL. He's played now 59 games. He has never scored a regular season goal. That's the only NHL goal that he has, and it was a dagger in Game 5 against the Maple Leafs. So, unfortunately for him, it's been a tough start to his NHL career, but just goes to show you the lack of offensive talent and talent just in general. No offense to Liam Foudy that the Blue Jackets currently employ.
Yeah, and so look, I mean, Liam Foudy's probably biggest contribution to the game was drawing that 4-minute penalty, right? So he gets that, and then it's 1-0 for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, this could get really bad here because Korpisalo's performing really well, and how often have we seen a goalie kind of stand on their head, and then a huge opportunity like that wakes up the other team? And to Toronto's PK credits, they certainly didn't allow for that to happen. And Columbus definitely going in a bit of a different direction. Certainly they are among a handful of teams that are in the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. And, just talking to people that are familiar, this was kind of one of those games where if you're a Toronto native working for Columbus or you're doing anything like that, you're thinking, you don't want wins. You want to have a respectable game. But at this point, despite what Gary Bettman says, teams do in fact tank. And so the Blue Jackets are very well primed in position. Maybe they do want to get that win in Toronto because every team that I talk to, visiting team, always loves winning in Toronto, regardless of where they are in the standings. But this is certainly a result that Columbus, I don't think, will mind, given what's going on with this young group and team. Really, the only unfortunate part for all of this is Johnny Gaudreau, because he made such a big commitment to this market. And I don't think he expected to go from a team that was competing hard in the playoffs like Calgary was to where they are right now in the first year of his contract. But it's also the destination that he selected to go to.
Yeah, something tells me that Johnny Gaudreau probably does not finish his career in Columbus if things continue to go this way. Maybe he wants out at some point. But tough go for Johnny Hockey in season number 1 with the Columbus Blue Jackets. One guy I thought, heading into the break, definitely needed the time off was Ilya Samsonov, just with the sheer amount of games that he had played. Matt Murray's injury did not help that, of course. And I thought, in this game tonight, wasn't tested a whole lot, had to make some, decent saves at times, especially when the game was still on the balance, when his team was leading 1-0. But he looked really fresh, Dave. I mean, I think the break definitely did him pretty well.
Yeah, I think Ilya Samsonov just is loving life right now. He's talked about wanting to play a lot more, and he's certainly getting that opportunity right now, and just performing really well, and he's just dialed in. Sheldon Keefe mentioned that the day before everyone came back, he was still on the ice, just trying to stay focused, stay in there, while also taking advantage of the break. I remember talking to him in the last game against the Bruins. He admitted that he was starting to feel a bit sick, not necessarily from the workload, but just there was a bug going around, so the team to disperse and get healthy. That's a big part for it, including for someone like Ilya Samsonov. But when you have Matt Murray come back and he can't play, like he's going post to post, making saves like you wouldn't believe when working with Curtis Sanford. But now it looks like he's going to be gone for a couple weeks. And this is just Samsonov right now. This is his net. Joseph Woll is likely going to get the game tomorrow. But outside of that, this is the Samsonov show right now. And usually what happens when a goaltender's not ready or something, or this is a chance, there's more pressure. And then you have this feeling that you might succumb to it. And then maybe the play starts to dip. That hasn't happened. In the long stretch that he's gone, you couldn't really fault him for the losses because of some of the lapses in the team's defense in front of him. But then also he comes right back and he becomes a reason the team wins the game as well. This is one of the easier shutouts he's going to have. He admitted that himself. But outside of that, he's rising to the occasion. And so at 1 year, $1.8 million and a restricted free agent, as long as he continues to play like this, he's going to make it a very difficult decision for the Toronto Maple Leafs beyond this season if they have playoff success with him. Obviously, that's the big caveat. But going into that, that's going to be a big part of all of this. Can Samsonov continue to keep the good vibes going and just take the net and never give it back? Like right now, it's looking pretty good for the Russian goalie.
Yeah, I think things would have to fall off the rails pretty hard for him to give it back up to Matt Murray. And I mean, who knows where he's at right now? He's on injured reserve.
Like he's not even there.
That's really the biggest thing. Yeah. He's not even there right now to compete for the spot. Joseph Woll is there, who, like you said, probably will get the start against Columbus on the second half of the back-to-back when the Maple Leafs return to Scotiabank Arena. But let's hear from Ilya Samsonov, who is all smiles these days. He says his teammates were a big part of his performance in this one.
I feel awesome right now. Next game, for sure, will be easy. But how I say, this more team win. How we play, this is great. We block a shot. We in offensive zone a lot of times, shoot attempts. We play great. I want to just say thank you for the team.
Yeah, always very thankful for his teammates, and tonight they did a great job in front of him to insulate him and make sure he wasn't tested with a lot of grade A chances. But quickly, just getting back to Matt Murray, and as you mentioned, he's not with the team right now. He's on IR with that ankle injury that the team revealed before the All-Star break. I mean, what is your read on this? Because we all remember that game a couple of weeks ago where we thought Matt Murray was going to start, took warm-ups, and then he did not end up playing in that one, aggravated that injury that Sheldon Keefe had mentioned, and we do find out it's the ankle injury. Now he's placed on IR coming out of the All-Star break. Is this something that's long-term in your mind? Is it something you think he'll be back soon? What's your read on the Matt Murray situation?
This is so random because when you looked at the way he was skating with Curtis Sanford yesterday before practice began, it looked like nothing was wrong with it at all. Like he's making difficult saves. He's covering the net. He's digging in. He's looking like a goalie who's ready to come back and play. But this is Matt Murray. This is his second stint on injured reserve. And this is an often injured goaltender that a lot of Ottawa media and fans warned that this was going to happen. And, Toronto's solution was they have a good sports med staff and return to play staff and all these things. And they're going to maximize the most out of a buy low situation, which is what the Leafs were doing in Matt Murray. Well, what I think now is that if this was any other goaltender with this type of injury, he would be back and he'd be playing and he'd be fine right now. I think the Leafs are so concerned about not having Murray available between now and the playoffs that they're just going to be cautious to the, I don't know what degree of caution you could even create. It'll be a brand new one, never created. Like, I think what will happen right now is even if he's okay, he's going to have to pass so many different things And then, you can get him into some regular season games if you need to. And then at that point, the whole purpose that they got him for was this is a 2-time Stanley Cup champion goaltender that you want to have at your disposal when the time matters. Well, what's happening right now? The Leafs believe a lot in their depth. Even with Matt Murray's injury, Kyle Dubas came out and said that they don't feel they need to make a David Riddick-esque. I'm paraphrasing with the Riddick reference, of course, but I'm referring to 2021 when Frederik Andersen was hurt and they elected to get a goaltender just to add to depth in case something went wrong after Campbell and Frederik Andersen couldn't go and they were deep in the playoffs and they didn't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole. I think everything right now is making sure Matt Murray is available in the event something happens where they need to flip the playoff experience switch for the playoffs. I think that's what all of this is about right now, because I don't know how you can look at Matt Murray's situation and feel comfortable that you can play him even if he feels he's ready when he's been on the injured reserve twice and both times came under very unusual circumstances. And if this was an ankle injury that he had been dealing with for a while and it flared up, well, then, I mean, if he's 98% ready, how do you feel confident nothing else is going to flare up with the rest of the 2% that might go wrong? So I think if you're the Leafs, you kind of have to just kind of let this play out. If it becomes an LTI situation, it might even be better for the Leafs if they want to use that money, because right now they don't have a lot of money to play with. And I think they're just going to have to figure out what the deal is between now and March 3rd with Matt Murray, because there's a lot of weird stuff in the soup here.
I love me a good LTIR situation where teams can take advantage of the cap situation, and maybe that is what goes down. But like you said, it's just so strange that he was out there yesterday, and all of a sudden he's on IR, and the Maple Leafs are going to get a look at Joseph Woll here. And I guess we can spend a couple of minutes on him. I know we haven't seen him for quite a while, Dave, and I think people have been really interested in his trajectory, I guess, if you want to put it that way, with where he was a couple of years ago as, a guy that I think people saw could be maybe the goalie of the future. People love to use that term, of course. And, it took him a while to get where he is because of injuries and underperformance and such. But here he is now, was an AHL All-Star, has been arguably the best goalie in the American Hockey League this year. I know it was the All-Star game, and I saw some of the, skills competition highlights, but definitely, showed the talent and ability that he has. I know Sheldon Keefe scored on him this morning at the optional morning skate, which was a tough look for him. But for people that have not been following the Joseph Woll story this year, what can you tell?
So Joseph Woll, it's actually really interesting. Several years ago, or even last year, when he got called up, he had a terrible save percentage in the American Hockey League. Like, they went to him and he just performed really well in the time that he was up here. Became the first ever goaltender in the NHL to record a shutout at UBS Arena. It was the Islanders' second ever game in that building after playing the Flames the night before. And Joseph Woll comes in to a situation for the Leafs on the back end of a back-to-back and shuts the door. And really that became Joseph Woll kind of getting on the radar of everyone around the league. And then, of course, he had to go through many different injuries, and it kept him out for a long period of time from last season into this year, which is probably why we didn't see him earlier when Eric Källgren got a lot of the call-up time, because I do know that the Leafs really wanted to get Woll in for another opportunity, but they couldn't. And then remember, they had to sign Keith Petruzzelli because the Leafs had all kinds of goalie and cap issues from contractual status stuff that was going on when Matt Murray got hurt the first time. But anyway, the big thing with Joseph Woll over the last couple of years, he's been diving deep into meditation, both from the recommendation of the Leafs performance staff, but also taking it a step further and really just cutting off social media and really just kind of staying ingrained in the moment of everything that he needs to do so that when he's on the ice, there aren't any other thoughts permeating. And as we've talked about many times, as Ilya Samsonov has talked about as well, the goaltending thing is, a lot of it is mental. And so I think Joseph Woll's taken a really big leap to kind of make that so much a part of his life that he doesn't get discouraged by the little things, and he's able to stay in the moment. And that's what's allowed him to kind of stay in the zone where, even though he's got a few shutouts and he sets a franchise record with the Marlies with 11 straight wins, it doesn't get to him. He doesn't get too overly excited about it. He's able to stay in the moment and perform well. Technically, he's always been there with Boston College. He's had good numbers. It's why the Leafs drafted him. He's got the size that they liked. Really, the only concern is the injuries. Remember, he had the shoulder injury and then he had an ankle injury during his recovery as well. Although he said that he felt that ankle injury actually was probably a blessing in disguise because it gave him maybe more time to make sure the shoulder thing wasn't going to be a nagging thing and he didn't come back too soon. So, he's got the pedigree for sure. He's of a draft. He's of a draft round that a lot of top goaltenders have come out as in the past. And, certainly if the Leafs have to move on from someone, he could be their number 2 that they feel great about. So I'm excited to see how he performs because I thought he performed really well and he's got a great support staff in front of him. Of course, this is going to be tough with the back-to-back, but at least the opponent he's playing is also coming off a back-to-back, and that should serve Joseph Woll against the Columbus Blue Jackets pretty well.
Yeah, and as we mentioned before, they can't score goals very often, so that's something working for him. But, I think what kind of stands out for me as far as the future outlook of him is that if he can become a guy, that would be big for the Maple Leafs and their, cap situation to be able to have someone that can step in on an entry-level deal and provide that cap relief and provide NHL caliber goaltending. Still a high bar. I mean, I don't think anyone expects him to all of a sudden just become the next great thing, but it's something to keep an eye on, and he'll get a great opportunity in game number 1 this year as he makes his season debut against the Columbus Blue Jackets on Saturday nights. All right, coming up on Rink-Wide Toronto, we'll get to the Bodog line of the day. We'll talk about it. Another season debut as well as Alex Steeves got into the lineup for the Maple Leafs tonight as they beat the Blue Jackets 3-0. It is Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. You're listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Is your online business ready for the cookie-less future and set to properly capture your customers' valuable first-party data? Hey, it's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit. So you can find out just exactly how ready your website is for the cookie-less future. Your online presence has never been more important. So visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
Naslund.
We weren't afraid of facing any line or any deep pairing because we knew that we would generate offense.
Bertuzzi.
I was like, I can play in this league and I can play a big role in this league and I can be dominant if all the stars align.
Morrison.
There was a confidence that we believed if we went out and played the way we were capable of, we could score every shift.
Their story in their words. Unreal West Coast Express. Available now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It is Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who was in Columbus to watch the Maple Leafs beat the Blue Jackets 3-0 at Nationwide Arena. It is time for the Bodog line of the day, and as you'd expect, the Leafs were heavy favorites going into this game, but they'll be heavy favorites for the next 4 games, David, as they'll take on the Blue Jackets Saturday at Scotiabank Arena. Then they'll face off against the Blackhawks, Montreal, and then Chicago. Again, of course, Montreal has given the Maple Leafs some problems this year. They always seem to do, so that is not exactly a big gimme game, but the Habs banged up right now, missing a lot of guys. I know, famous last words, it's going to come back and bite me in the butt, I'm sure. But you look at the schedule right now in these next 4 games, The Leafs now 4 points up on Tampa Bay. The Lightning still do have 2 games in hand, but you would think if there was ever a time to make some hay and spread your wings a little bit here in the Atlantic Division, it might be this 4-game stretch. I think 3-1 probably has to be the minimum, and 4-0 is gravy, I think, if you're the man.
Yeah, I mean, look, right now the race is really to try and create some separation from the Tampa Bay Lightning to host the opening round. Like, that's really what this is all about. I think there was a huge opportunity missed from the Toronto Maple Leafs going into the break when they lost to the Boston Bruins at home in regulation. And at least, as tall of an order that was, bringing that deficit down to single digits would have been a nice little boon going into the break. But they weren't able to do that. Instead, it turned into a 13-point deficit. And I just don't think it's attainable at this point. So, you can try and separate from Tampa. You can kind of prepare between now and then. And yeah, certainly getting the points is huge. What the Leafs will do in terms of trade deadline as far as reinforcements and how they're going to match up against the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think is going to be very interesting as well. So, Tampa used a lot of their capital at the deadline last year to get some key pieces who are still there. Brandon Hagel obviously comes to mind in that regard. And so really, I'm curious now with the Toronto Maple Leafs as to how they use their capital to try and match up between now and March 3rd at the deadline, because everything now has got to be, how do you beat the juggernaut that is the Tampa Bay Lightning, the playoff juggernaut that is?
Yeah, they are very good and are going to be a tough opponent, regardless of, the moves that they may or may not make come trade deadline. You would think, historically, they've always gone out and, done something. So I would be a little bit surprised if they don't make an addition here or there. And I would be surprised if the Maple Leafs don't make an addition either. And, it's funny to see all the rumors and the connections with the Maple Leafs and who they may be interested, who they may not be interested. Honestly, it feels like it changes week to week, Dave. I think right now, this week, I've been reading or seeing tweets or listening to podcasts, listening to radio, and it's, one person says, oh, the Leafs are interested in the blue liners. And then you hear someone else say, oh, the Maple Leafs are interested in a forward. Now, they have not been connected to any goaltenders. So I think, that would be a shock if they did make an addition there. And I don't know, who knows what happens with Matt Murray. Maybe they do something. But as it stands right now, February the 10th, Friday, as we're recording this, what is your sense on the, positional situation that the Leafs are looking at maybe adding for come the trade deadline?
So I had a lot of time to think about this during the break because, I don't like trying to forecast and doing whatever, but the last couple of trade deadlines, there's been like a player that stood out to me that's been talked about a little bit. And then the volume behind that player seems to increase as it gets closer to the deadline. And then it comes to fruition. And I don't have any strong intel, so I don't want to get people to get too excited. But the more I think about it, the more I feel the Leafs need an established third line center. Like, I watched again a lot of the games that the Leafs had going into the break. I feel like someone like a David Kampf has kind of dropped a little bit in his performance. He's been okay, but I don't know if he's the everyday third line center that's going to get the Leafs over the hump. And so I look at what's out there and I look at the previous pattern of Leaf trades. And I also look at everything Kyle Dubas said yesterday in terms of not giving up a lot and just kind of players that would be available, but only available to be allowed to be traded for certain situations. And the number one name that keeps popping into my head is Jonathan Toews. Like, I really feel like if there is a situation where he's willing to move to just a couple of teams where because of that, the return is so small, like maybe a second rounder and a prospect or whatever the case may be, or just maybe multiple picks, you can have an established everyday third line center, because that's where I feel Jonathan Tavares is kind of at. Jonathan Toews is right now in that regard, but could also help in the second line when necessary if there's an injury. Like, you're seeing it now with Austin Matthews out, you don't really want like Alex Kerfoot as your number 2 option there. As good as he can be in that spot, I really do think they need more depth at the center spot. I think that's kind of become obvious now. But then when you have everyone healthy, you have an established everyday third line center. And you look at previous cup winners, the third line center in all those teams have been someone who's just been undoubtedly good. So I think that's a real missing piece there. And if it was me, that's kind of who I think the Leafs should target.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Maybe not so much Jonathan Toews specifically, but I am with you that, I am intrigued by a third line center coming into the Maple Leafs lineup. I think my preferred choice is still a top 6 winger. Timo Meier probably right at the top of everybody's list, not just the Maple Leafs, of course. But I think, as you mentioned, David Kampf, not that he's bad, but the play has slipped. Now, that being said, he did throw a beautiful backhand sauce to Morgan Rielly on the Pierre Engvall goal. But I think he is more suited as a fourth line guy. And, I think he might get just a little overexposed at times as the third line center, especially offensively. I know he scored 11 goals last year. I know he had 2 in the series against the Lightning, but that's not what he does. And I think the Leafs are probably better off with a guy that can bring more offensive ability and still be reliable defensively. Because I look at Pierre Engvall, and I know he's not everyone's cup of tea, but he's got 11 goals in 51 games with a very minimal power play time. Like, that's pretty impressive to get that many goals from your third line left winger right now. And if you could give him someone that is a little bit more skilled offensively, I mean, he might even be more of a threat playing against the depth lines of other teams. And, Pontus Holmberg, I think at times we felt might be that guy. And he is, of course, slowed down, I think, a little bit when he was put into that top 6 for that one game. He definitely had a rough go. So, I can't imagine that Sheldon Keefe and the Maple Leafs feel comfortable throwing him to a third line center role heading into a playoff series against
or even a fourth line spot in the playoffs. Look how many times,
or even a fourth line spot,
yeah. Like guys who they've had, no matter how good they've been in the system, go to a playoff and it's a completely different animal. And they need more seasoned experience. Rasmus Sandin and Timothy Liljegren come to mind, although Sandin didn't even play in the playoffs last year because he was hurt, and I'm still intrigued to see how he handles it. But Timothy Liljegren was great down the stretch, but then he got benched after the couple of games in that playoff series. And, that can happen, which is why I think you need to look for some of those experienced guys and just push some of your depth further down, because you're going to come into situations with a lot of guys who've just never been there before. You've got to have a response for what if that guy doesn't work? And I feel that was missing from the Leafs against the Lightning last year.
Yeah, I mean, I am very intrigued because I think, the Maple Leafs could go in a lot of different directions here with regards to what they do with the deadline. And I mean, we haven't even talked about the blue line because, as I said, I think there are people throwing that out there that they could see an addition on the back end. I'm still of the mindset, I mean, it would have to be a pretty big upgrade to replace some of these guys. And, not that Justin Hall is irreplaceable or Rasmus Sandin is irreplaceable, but, they've been really good this year. And I think, you're not going to just throw in, I keep using his name, but you're not just going to throw Luke Shen in there and play him over Justin Hall, 18, 20 minutes a game. Like, that's just not going to happen. And that's not the best way to go about things. I know there was a report I saw on Twitter tonight about maybe Tyler Myers is someone that the Leafs have shown some interest in. I'm not sure if that's the solution either. So that's sort of what I mean about, every week it seems like it changes, that there's all these new rumors out there. The Leafs are connected to this guy. One week it's Jake McCabe. The next week it's Max Domi. The next week it's Timo Meier. The next week it's Jacob Chikrin. Like, it's constantly changing. And I think there is probably a semblance of truth to it, Dave, that, the Maple Leafs have either internally discussed these guys, which they should be doing. That's their due diligence. But, I'm sure they've called on teams just to get a gauge of, if we were to make a deal for this guy, what is it going to take? And then, of course, that gets spun into, the Maple Leafs are targeting so-and-so, when we know GMs just talk all the time about, what's going on and the situations that they're in.
And look, I mean, when you look at last year and you look at everything that Kyle Dubas said in his media availability with us the previous day, they don't want to give up a first round pick for rental. Like they did it once with Nick Foligno. It didn't work out. That was obviously a very different year where the Leafs had a very clear path to the Final Four. Unfortunately, we know for them how that turned out. But then in the following year, Mark Giordano was pretty clear he was only going to go to one team at that point, and he kind of held the cards to do that. So the Leafs were able to get away with just giving up a pair of second round picks for Giordano and Colin Blackwell, and we're able to address a forward and a defenseman in one trade. So when you look at rentals and guys who have no moves or no trades where they can kind of dictate, that's going to help the Leafs in terms of what they're willing to part with in return. Because if it's someone else who doesn't have that, then there's more suitors. Then you're obviously going to have teams like what the Vancouver Canucks did with Bo Horvat, or what the Rangers did with Vladimir Tarasenko as well. So like you're going to have different situations like that where players that control their destiny, like are just going to pick and choose where they're going to want to go. And that's going to help the quote unquote buyers like the Toronto Maple Leafs. And so, that's kind of where the Jonathan Toews one comes from, because to me, even if you do only have room for one move where you have to address both offense and defense, well, what's the one best move you can do that addresses both offense and defense? It's the most offensive position there is, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the thinking there. So it could go a lot of different ways. And that's why you're going to see all those reports, because a lot of calls are happening. And Kyle Dubas is of the mind that he's not going to dismiss anything right away. He's going to listen on everything. He'll compartmentalize it. He'll address it, and then he'll respond with, yeah, that makes sense for us, or it doesn't make sense for us. So that's what the fun of trade deadline is going to be between now and March.
Well, considering what happened last year with the Chicago Blackhawks and their GM, Kyle Davidson and Kyle Dubas, there's some history there. Who knows if they've patched things up, but that throws an interesting wrinkle into things as well. If the Leafs front office is still holding a grudge against Chicago's front office. But if there's a deal to be made, I'm sure they're going to work things out. But lots of different names seemingly every week crop up, and the Maple Leafs are connected to it. We'll see who they're connected to next week. But the carousel, Dave, continued on the fourth line tonight. We saw Alex Steeves get into the lineup for his first game of the season. Almost scored a goal. Great save by Jonas Korpisalo to prevent that from happening. Would have been his first goal of the season. But, he's had a strong season again down with the Toronto Marlies, 38 points in 44 games. And, was one of those guys that you and I both talked about prior to the season as someone that we thought may come up and could be a contributor if there were injuries, or, the Maple Leafs were just looking for a bit of a different look down on the fourth line. But here we are again. Just the constant rotation. You've said it many times that you would like to see the Maple Leafs get to a point where they are just solidified with their bottom six and they run with it. And maybe there's still a lot at play because we're not at the trade deadline yet. And if they, add a Jonathan Toews, clearly they have to put him into the lineup. But, what do you make of Alex Steeves getting a crack at things tonight?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's kind of long overdue, but I kind of understand why they took so long to call him up, because these were the bottom six positions that didn't necessarily make sense for someone like Alex Steeves. I actually would like to see him play on the third line, because he has an offensive ability about him that I think he's actually a better third line guy. But they're giving Joey Anderson a bit of a run in that spot instead. And it's interesting to me because, Alex Steeves had a terrific camp. He really did. And it was proven by the fact that they only took a handful of prospects to that couple of days retreat in Gravenhurst and kind of left everyone who was pretty much clear of not making the team back in Toronto for that. So it was a surprise to me because, they called up a lot of different guys for a lot of different reasons. Like the one that kind of stood out that was kind of bizarre to me was when they called up SDA for one game in Dallas, played on the fourth line, and then he was gone as quickly as he arrived. And I thought to myself, this is probably where someone like a Steeves would have made sense to kind of come up. But they want him to work on his skating and a lot of the other things. And In the AHL, he's excelling, but I think they're just waiting for the right opportunity where his skill set can be on display at the NHL level. So it sounds like at least while Matthews is gone, he's going to be on a bit of a run here, and then we'll see. And I like his determination. I pulled him aside this morning just to kind of ask him if he was, frustrated at all that it took so long for him to be called up when it looked like he was kind of one of the next ones early on and already played 3 games at the NHL level. And, he admitted that it was, but he was also mixed emotions about it. He was happy for his teammates, and he was frustrated by the fact that he's an ambitious person and really wants to push. And, he made it known to myself and other reporters during training camp, especially when I talked to him in Traverse City at the Prospects, that he's determined to be an everyday NHLer. He came in, spent a lot of his time in the off season working with the skills staff and displaying those traits. So maybe there is a bit of frustration there that it took until February 2023 for his opportunity to come when there have been all these injuries and different opportunities. But I do think that they wanted to give him a run where it wasn't going to be short and it wasn't going to be a situation where he couldn't put his skill set on display. And so I think this is maybe the right spot for him. And maybe he's not the first send down when Matthews is activated. And maybe we see either Holmberg or Joey Anderson be one of the guys sent down, and Steve's get maybe a little bit more of a run. And, I thought his game was good. You mentioned the close opportunity he had to scoring a goal. I would like to see him get more minutes and see what he can do in an elevated role, but I think that time is coming soon.
Yeah, it was, a pretty decent debut with that opportunity there to score a goal. We'll see how he fares in the second game on the back-to-back against the Columbus Blue Jackets if he is in the lineup. But like you said, it does seem like he's going to get a little bit of a run here. All right, got a couple of minutes. It's been a while since we've done this because the Maple Leafs played a lot of home games, Dave, but I know you put it out on TikTok prior to the game. Media Meal Musings, the first time we've had a chance to talk about the Columbus media meal this season. What was it like?
So from an S being the best, and I don't, those S tier memes, what's the bottom? Is it F or is it E?
Oh goodness. Yeah, probably. I mean, you could probably go as low as you want.
I gave it kind of like a B minus. Like it's an okay meal. Like there's the pork loin was really good. But there wasn't a lot of variety. They kind of had a taco spread as well, but it was kind of weirdly laid out where the top, like the line started and it starts with the salads and all these things. Then there were the toppings for the salad and nacho chips. And at the very end were the shells. So it's like, shouldn't the shells be in the beginning? Like if you're going to go, this is just a traffic jam mess where you kind of have to grab the shells and then go back and fill it. So, it tasted all right. They have great ice cream for dessert. So there's things to like. It's only $10 US, which is a lot after conversion, but by US standards is not a lot of money. But there wasn't a lot of variety outside of the pork loin, but it tasted good. So I give it a solid B minus there. Certainly not the best, definitely not the worst. I've seen some pretty bad ones on the road. So it's one of those things where because I knew what it was and because I'm all about the TikToks now, like I've got to sample it. Usually what I've done in the past is I've gone to Jimmy John's across the street. I'm sure you've been to Jimmy John's before, US sub chain,
right,
where they advertise free smells, which I always laugh at whenever I see that in the window, that the smells are free. Anyway, so make with that what you will. But, yeah, pretty good meal. Hit the spot. I had sushi for lunch at this place. I wish I remember the name. I'll, text my buddy who I had lunch with who lives here and I'll let you know what that was. But that was delicious for Ohio-based sushi when you're not near an ocean. I thought that was phenomenal. So I'll be sure to get that name and bring it up on tomorrow's podcast.
All right. That's pretty solid. I was surprised. I was expecting maybe a worse grade for the Columbus medium meal, but
B is like
solid.
A C in the
nice way to
here. That ever since they made the Supreme tier, it's thrown the whole lettering curve grade out of it. So I'm taking S into account there. Like Detroit's S. Detroit is S. There's a lot of good ones that have been in the A. There's been a lot of D's and F's. But Columbus is in the B to C border there.
All right. Well, look, it's not the worst you've ever had, so that's good. That's a good way to start the unofficial second half of the season. But luckily, you won't have to
and it's
worry
not as
about
bad
that.
as the Louis Domingue, not the best. Kind of not the best.
Yeah. Well, luckily you won't have to worry about the B tier Columbus meal the rest of the season.
Just one visit.
So that is good there. Just the one visit, as the Blue Jackets will visit the Maple Leafs on Saturday night for the second half of the back-to-back. Joseph Wall will likely get the starting goal for the Maple Leafs, and after it's all said and done, we will have another Rink-Wide Toronto post-game show. Make sure to like, review, and subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. You can follow us on Twitter, RinkWideTOR, DAlter, and at RobWong34. You can always get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Hey, it's Darren Dreger and Ray Ferraro from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. And Ray, we're into the second half of the NHL season, and the trade deadline is obviously getting closer.
Every night, wins and losses are starting to mean more as teams try to stay in the mix in the standings to secure that playoff spot. And man, some teams could use some help before the deadline.
Yeah, we've got the storylines, trade rumblings all covered, along with the top hockey guests twice weekly, right here on the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get podcasts.